So stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think that's why we love them so much. It's because human experience that we have, they match our journey, lives, and they are simply true to who we are. Okay. So what I wanted to do today is to take a few minutes and talk about what I've learned. And in working with speakers over the course of the last 4 years, over 45 events, often I talk to speakers about, what do you think this audience wants to hear? And what I often say is just tell your story. But also don't forget to tell the takeaways, tell the lessons. Talk about what you learned along the way. And I know that's often the hardest part for people because they feel like they're put in a position where they're giving other people advice. And now that I'm standing up here, I know a little bit about what that feels like. And I feel like, who am I to give other people advice? But it's kind of too late now. So what I wanted to talk about today are a few things of what I know to be true. And if I could just summarize this really briefly, it's 3 elements in particular. It's exactly what Vishali said about our manifesto. It's about finding that sense of purpose of who you are, putting all your energy toward it, putting all your passion toward that goal, and then in that place, you will find yourself where you feel comfortable and you will feel realized. Number 1. Is we are all made of stories. It's simply who we are. And for me, I always wanted to be a writer, ever since I could remember. And I grew up in South Dakota, grew up in the Midwest, and I came home from college one summer, and during that time, I worked for my hometown newspaper, and it was a really exciting time for me because it was the chance for me to actually practice this work that I'd spent time learning in school. But I also got to be a journalist, and I love being a journalist, and I love telling other people's stories. But one of the jobs that they gave me was a column that was called Farm Neighbors. And my entire purpose in this column was simply to find a farm family to write about. But what they didn't give me was any leads. And so I found myself going essentially the equivalent of door to door down prairie roads just like this, knocking on people's doors and simply finding the excuse. And it is okay. Are we there yet? Awesome, okay. So I would find myself standing at the door of these farmhouses, standing in front of a very humble, very shy farmer, and trying to explain to them that I want to write about them in the newspaper without having a really good reason why. And it was fascinating to me because I was young and naive, and I thought if I could just simply sit down with them for a few minutes and ask them a few questions, that I would find a story. There's always a story somewhere. And the thing is, I was usually right, and not because I was particularly good at what I did, but because I simply asked the question why enough times to get to the heart of that human story that every single person has. And that's the reason why you can find that story in every single person, is because we are all human. It's simply part of who we are. And I took that experience back with me to college in my focus and working on language. And around this time, I had discovered that I had a famous relative, a third cousin of mine, Al Newharth, who started USA Today. And he grew up in the same small town in South Dakota that my parents did. And he spent all of his time at the college newspaper that I did. And part of what was so fascinating about Al Newharth, he actually became really famous for his writing style because it was very, very plain spoken. It became very well known for being very easy to digest. And part of that direct language really spoke to me in how to communicate. And I took that with me to my first job out of college. You all might remember Gateway, the computer company. I worked in a cow-spotted aluminum shed, half-mile long. On the first floor, they made the computers. On the second floor, they figured out how to sell them. And when I joined the company, I asked my boss any tips, any advice for me, and he said, well, you have to learn how to write in the Gateway voice. And I said, great, what's the Gateway voice? And he said, well, you have to learn how to write like the CEO. The CEO is fifth-generation cattle rancher. He has a very plain-spoken voice, too. And I quickly realized that at a large company like that, the CEO very rarely writes anything. But I went down to the creative services department, and I asked them, how do you write in the Gateway voice? And the person I spoke to gave me a piece of advice that had changed the course of my career ever since. She said, whenever I'm getting ready to write an ad for Gateway, I simply imagine the voice of Tom Bodette, the Motel 6 guy that will leave the light on for you. And I thought, this is brilliant, because then it's almost like you're writing for a character, and all of the personality that that brand encompasses, it's simply just coming out within your words. I'm like, that's genius, I got it. And so I've taken that with me as advice ever since, that brands, they're ultimately an expression of personality. Another thing I learned around this time is to embrace your tools, and your tools are grammar. If you're a writer, your language is how you work. If you're a developer, know your coding language. This is simply a tool for voice, and voice is a tool for persuasion, and that's ultimately how you express brand. Now, a lot of this talk is going to be short on practical advice, but if I could just give one simple piece of practical advice. I've had the chance to work with a lot of writers. I spent a lot of my career focusing on content and messaging. And if I could just give you one piece of advice, it's this. This is 3 hours of writing workshop in 3 words. Just write short sentences. It fixes everything. Number 3, we're all here to make meaning. And as Vishali said, we are all creative. No matter what your role is or matter what you do, we are all creative. But we're here to find those creative connections that really inspire people and inspire us. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about brands, but I want to go back to my very first branding experience. So I don't know how many of you will remember when bottles of soda looked like this, where they had this foam wrapper on the outside that was, I'm sure, environmentally destructive, but enormously satisfying to tear off in little strips. Everybody remember? Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads, good. And I was about 8 or 9 years old and sitting out in front of a convenience store with a friend of mine. And I am tearing the wrapper off this thing, as we normally would, just killing time. And he looks over at me and he said, I stopped doing that because it makes the Coke taste bad. And I thought, you idiot. But here's the thing, now more than ever, I know that to be 100% true. And it's true because we have human evolution telling us how we perceive certain things. And that perception is coloring and it's changing how we perceive the products, the companies we work with. So this is as 100% true for me today as it ever was. So I took a lot of these experiences coming out of Gateway. I spent 2 years at IBM, moved to North Carolina. And then I joined a company called Red Hat in 2000 when the company was 350 people. It grew 10 times while I was there. It's probably grown 4 or 5 times since I left. And I absolutely loved working with Red Hat, and I loved the team. And we took a lot of those experiences to start a company called Newkind. So Newkind just celebrated its 10-year anniversary, and we primarily work with technology companies and a lot of open source companies just because of our connections and our roots. But occasionally we take on a local project as well. We did the branding and the messaging for CAM when it moved into this incredible building. And we got to work with Weaver Street Market, which is just going to open just down a block from here, which we're really proud of too. But one of the companies we had the chance to work on, a technology company called Ansible, about 3 or 4 years ago. And you see the logo here being tattooed on Adam Miller's arm, and this happened just last year. Now, about 3 years ago, the company was bought by Red Hat, and we're very, very proud of that. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is why somebody would do this. why somebody would make something like this permanent, because it's obviously a brand itself is so much more than a logo. A brand is how people think of you, and it's a combination of a lot of things. It's symbols and colors and typefaces and the messages that you tell, what your website looks like, all those experiences, but it's also a lot of other things too, a lot of all these other things that happen inside your head. It's why customers buy from you and why they trust you. Now, some of these things that you can actually control, and some of these things you can only hope to influence. But how we look at it as a company is ultimately looking at through a set of layers, working from the bottom up, where we are focusing first on purpose, how you think, your mission, vision, values as a company, and that's where your personality comes from, building up from this bottom layer, because that's ultimately how you create a reputation. Now, there are so many connections between how we look at building brands and how each one of us sees our own brand and sees the own work that we do every day. It really has to be built from within, from the inside out, from the bottom up. Now, Lauryn Hill she provided me with my all-time favorite branding quote. She said, "How are you gonna win when you wait right within?" Which I think sums it up just perfectly. Find your truest why. You know, I think it's so important for each one of us to be on this search of finding that purpose, and it's such a personal thing for all of us to be able to find that purpose for why we exist. One of the speakers that really inspired me over the years at CreativeMornings was Kevin Trapani. If you might recognize Kevin, he is the founder of a company called Redwoods. It's an insurance company. But he came to speak to talk about empathy. And anyone who came to hear a talk from a person who started an insurance company were very, very surprised. Now, the entire mission of this company, Redwoods, is all about keeping children safe. And their vehicle to do that is to take all of the knowledge that they've learned as an insurance company, because they have all kinds of data, how kids are getting hurt, and they use that to train people for how to keep children safe in Jewish community centers and YMCAs and in Boys and Girls Clubs. So the lesson here is that you can have a company and a cause at the same time. You can match what you're really passionate about and what makes money and what makes you a living. So in terms of thinking about what that purpose is for you, often it comes at the answer of these three questions, and you really have to find out those questions for yourself. Who are you? What matters to you? And what is the work that you love enough to be able to do it forever? So once you've found it, and don't worry if you haven't found it yet, you can always find it along the way. But once you've found it, to treat that craft, treat your work as your calling. Now, one of the boldest talks that I think I've heard, I'd seen at CreativeMornings was Paul Frederick. When Paul Frederick spoke, he simply had all of his cartoons and illustrations running on random behind him, and he just gave his talk that way. I absolutely loved it. But he had to interrupt his talk multiple times because people kept laughing behind him. So Paul Frederick is an illustrator, he's an artist, he created Onion Head Monster. You've seen his work all over town. You might think you don't recognize it, but trust me, you've seen it all over town. The thing about Paul that's so cool is he is a professional. He hustles. He is a hard worker, and that's the reason why we had him speak on this theme of work. But if you talk to him as a creative individual and you see his work, he is like a 9-year-old. He's always tapping into that imagination. But the lesson here is how hard he has to work to be able to do that thing that he loves, to be able to do that as his line of business and as his living. And so that's one of the lessons that I take from this, is that a lot of times, especially in this space of branding and creativity, where if you're a photographer, or if you're a writer, or if you're a web designer, it's easier than ever to learn the tools to do that. And that's one of the things that I constantly stress is it's easy to fake it till you make it, but really treat that as your craft calling. Take the time to learn that craft and learn from the people who've come before. Number 6, momentum moves the world. If you remember, it wasn't that long ago that Jenny Bonchak spoke. She's the owner of Slingshot Coffee, and she told the story of how she got started in the business and all of the obstacles that she had to overcome. And one of the parts of her story that I love so much, when she talked about expanding her product line, and she was going to make a soda. And she said, I have no idea how to make a soda. And so what did she do? She said, I just went and looked on YouTube for a tutorial on how to make a soda, just like the rest of us do. And so here you see somebody who's enormously successful. There's not a coffee shop in the area. There's not a grocery store in the area that doesn't sell Slingshot cold brew, whether it's in a bottle or on draft. And you see someone who's successful in that place, and you think, how did that person get to that point? Well, it's simple. It's just a matter of taking that first step of just simply starting somewhere, and each one of us can do it. Because here's the reality, and it's a hard paradox of anything in the world, is that you only truly get stronger by doing harder things. Because the reward for doing harder things often is getting to do harder and harder things. And I know that is a terrible situation to suggest, and I know that doesn't feel good, but the reward for that, it's kind of like climbing a mountain, where you get up to that certain level, that base camp, and because you're so focused and you put so much energy into climbing up that hill, that you get to that certain level and then you just turn around and you think, how did I get up to this place? And that's the beauty of it, is that those problems that you had to overcome earlier on never seem quite so difficult again. That's why I loved hearing Jacob Boehm talk. He is the founder of Snap Pea Underground. And if anyone has been to a Snap Pea event, I know there are lots of people in the room who have, what he does with these events is create an absolutely unforgettable experience where he chooses a location, he makes that location a surprise, and it's usually outdoors, and he has an incredible meal that you will never forget. And in order to get to this place and realize this was the right business for him, he took his two loves. The first love was cooking, and his background, his education in theater lighting. And so that's what he wanted to do, was to create these experiences that people would tell other people about. But one of the reasons that we had him speak on anxiety is because each one of these new environments and each one of these new situations, it's like opening a new restaurant. It's a completely new experience each time. And so each one of those provides its own set of challenges, and you simply get used to those challenges and you become more and more comfortable. And that's the best way to learn, is just to simply do, because as much as you do, it gives you the strength to learn, and that gives you the confidence that every single challenge gets a little bit easier. And once you have that freedom behind you, everything gets a whole lot simpler for you. Carol Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, absolutely changed my life, talked about the growth mindset, and she said becoming is better than being. And I love this word becoming because it's not a static end state. It's always in the state of growth. And this is one of the secrets that I've found to life, is just to keep growing and just to keep learning, because that's when you'll find that place where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you are you, where you have the freedom to do your best work and to live your best life. So nature already has the answer. So she's sitting just off to the side. Hi, Kendra. We had Kendra Leonard speak on courage. And anyone who attended that day left without any question as to why she was the one who was speaking on courage. She told the story of meeting the love of her life, only for him to be diagnosed with leukemia, and she married him a month or two before he died. And she told this story about what that was like, going through that process. And she also talked about her career, and she was working as the manager of a local store that was part of a large clothing chain. You've all heard of it. She mentioned it in her talk, but I won't mention it. But she felt like she wasn't being appreciated. And after her husband died, she said, life is too short. And she was a single mother, and she decided, I'm gonna live my dream, I'm gonna start my own store. And she started Art of Style, which is just 3 blocks down the street. And her reminder for all of us and everyone in that room is that this is all going to happen to you. This experience that I went through, none of you are getting out of this. This is going to happen. So live your dream. Go chase it down. Take that risk, because none of this experience is going to last, and that's all by design. And it's simply part of the natural cycles of life. You know, the hot weather is going to give way to seasons, presidential terms. These things are designed not to last. And sometimes we can be grateful for that. And we're certainly not the first to figure this out. The ancient Greeks and Romans had this philosophy called Stoicism, and I'm a huge fan of the Stoic philosophy, because what the Stoic philosophy ultimately teaches is to remind us that we are all mortal, that we are all here for this short time. Now, in the early Greek and Roman times, their time was a whole lot shorter than ours. I know it's a little harder for us to think about those things, but it's that constant reminder of this is your opportunity to be present, to be around the people that you love, to do the work you love, and do the things that inspire you, and really embrace those moments. But if I were to sum up the Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, it would look a little like this. It's not a direct quote. But the idea is that there are going to be lots of things that can hurt us on the outside every single day. It's simply part of life. You have to accept it. But it's up to us to decide what hurts us on the inside. Now, I know this is much, much harder than it sounds, but I think it's a great ideal to live up to. Seneca, he said that every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. And there might be a reason why you're laughing, because I've held on to this quote for a long time because it was always really important to me, but as I usually do, I want to double check these quotes. So on Monday, when I was looking back, I double checked this quote, and it's actually also used in the Semisonic 90s band, the song Closing Time, which has been used to chase people out of bars ever since. A slightly different context. So we're talking about ends, but this is where it all started for me. So as Vishali said, this was my first event on my wife's birthday 4 years ago, June 26th. And this photo in particular is really important for me because, first of all, this event was as my first as host. It also just happened to be the theme of revolution, which was chosen by Taylor Medlin. It was chosen by our chapter. So all of the themes around the world, basically all of the chapters we take turns choosing those themes. And this one happened to be our turn. And it was great to be able to be a part of that for that theme of revolution. But our speaker was the brilliant Pierce Freelon. And the thing I love about this photo in particular is that it has 3 future speakers in it. And it has one very dedicated volunteer that I hadn't met yet, Scott Richardson. And it has Vishali Patel attending her first Creative Mornings event, her very first. And so this to me is just, when I found this out, just a sign of this new beginning. And I'm so excited about where this event is going to go next. And it also is a wonderful reminder to me that this is just simply a borrowed existence and a wonderful experience that I've had for this short period of time. And all of us, and myself especially, owe a huge debt of gratitude to Matt Tomasula, who started this Creative Mornings in Raleigh, and Taylor Medlin, who was the host that gave me this opportunity to be able to do this. So thank you so much for them. We are all here because of them. And finally, to live every moment with gratitude. So some of you might recognize Heather Lagarde. Heather Lagarde is the owner of Hall River Ballroom, but she has also dedicated her life to improving global health, and she runs an incredible event called Switchpoint that brings together global health professionals, particularly from developing countries. And Heather was one of the earliest speakers that I had at Creative Mornings. And she talked from the beginning about when she was born, that doctors had said she was incompatible with life. And so she had a birth defect that really changed her perspective, and she always felt like she was living on borrowed time. And she's the kind of person that, if you know her, wears her heart on the outside because she is very open and open to life. And this is an ideal that I love to live up to when I can. And hearing Heather talk, she just reminded all of us that this is a borrowed existence. This is a journey that all of us are on together, and to appreciate the time that we have, and to celebrate each one of those individual moments because they are all so special. And for me, one of my most special moments at Creative Mornings, and I hope a few of you were there at Transfer, when Joe Kwan spoke. He's the cellist for the Avett Brothers, and he told his story of a chance encounter when he walked up to the bassist of the Avett Brothers and joined the band and changed his life and makes millions of people around the world happy, touring and recording with the band. And at the end of his talk, he played the song No Hard Feelings. And this song, if you haven't heard it, take a moment sometime, maybe later today or this weekend, and go watch the video of them recording this song, because this song in particular is probably about one of the best summaries of life that I've ever heard. And it is absolutely beautiful. And I had the opportunity to be sitting at the front of the room like I normally would with any other Creative Mornings, and to watch a sea of 300 people packed into a room. I saw transfixed faces, I saw tears, I saw nothing but love in that room. And I just sat there thinking how lucky I am, which is why my face looks like that. So my part of the journey of this story, it ends here. I just want to say how much I've loved being part of your Friday mornings once a month. I absolutely loved helping bring some of these stories to you, and more than you will ever know, I love being your DJ. That was so much fun. And I just want to say how grateful I am, because this humble event, this would not be here if not for you all coming. You are the reason that we are a part of this. You're the reason that we do this. You're the reason that this team volunteers their time. And I just want to say how grateful I am for the incredible experience of seeing people who bring joy and wonder, who bring a gift of art to all of us, who bring the joy of music and the joy of dance that we can celebrate. I am so grateful for the people who make you feel a little more comfortable with who you are and make you feel welcome. And I am so grateful for the people who put good into the world. And I'm grateful for all of you. Thank you.
Wow. Questions? Comments? Thoughts? Appreciations?
2 thumbs up.
Yeah. Anyone? You guys aren't going to pick Jonathan's brain after so many years? Yeah.
So what's coming up next for you?
So I don't know. I spent 4 amazing years doing this. I did not think I would probably be doing this for 4 years, but I fell in love with this event. I fell in love with all of you. I fell in love with the team. The team made this so easy and so much fun. And I spent 4 years before that volunteering for an organization called AIGA for graphic design. And yeah, AIGA. So I'm trying to figure out what's next. Yeah, but that's a great question. Questions?
Anyone else? Okay. Oh, go, Mike.
I've probably been to 30 of these, and I want to say that was the most succinct, meaningful, meat-filled plate we've had.
That's high praise coming from Mike. It's absolutely true that Mike has been to 30 events, and yeah, Mike was one of the first people who came up to me on the street and thanked me for Creative Mornings. And every time Mike has a suggestion, he always texts me, and he's also been a benefactor of this event. And often when we try to make changes or try to make improvements, he's one of the people that I'm continually thinking about. So thank you, Mike, for being here for the duration. Thank you.
Let's give a final thank you to Jonathan. We're so grateful for everything. And please come. Thank you. Whew. Thank you all. We'll see you next month.